They cut the braid from his shoulder first, before the herald read the charge, because every man in the courtyard already knew the verdict, and the braid was what they wanted to take. Halden Vask did not move. He had stood through worse mornings. He had stood the long vigil over the late king's coffin, 3 days without water, and his back had not bent then either. The herald's voice climbed and broke against the cold stone of the Velenry Palace forecourt, and the words came in pieces. Dereliction, conspiracy, the theft of the lion seal, a sentinel found dead on the inner stair. Each charge was a stone laid on his chest. Each one was a lie. He kept his eyes level with the line where the gilded railing met the grey sky, the way a captain of the royal guard kept them, the way he had taught 200 younger men to keep them. Prince Aldric of Velanry, newly named King Heir, the late king's only surviving son, 26 years old and immaculate in white, stepped down from the dais and walked the length of the line. His boots clicked. The court watched. They had watched Halden Vask dragged from the inner palace in chains at midnight, watched the bloody lion seal produced from a chest in his own quarters, watched the dead sentinel's mother weep beneath the colonnade. The decision was already in their faces before the herald spoke. Halden saw the white glove close on the braid that marked him captain of the King's Guard, 21 years of service, 3 campaigns at the border, the cord his own commander had tied on his shoulder the morning he came of age. The braid came away without effort. Aldric let it fall to the cobblestones between them. The court was too well bred to gasp. "You may speak," Aldric said. His voice was kind. That was the worst part. The kindness was the polish on the lie. Halden did not speak. He had been a guardsman long enough to know that protesting innocence in a courtyard already decided was the act of a fool. He let the silence stand. The silence was his own. "Brand him," the prince said gently, "and send him to the mire." The brand was a small thing, a half-circle pressed cold hot into the inside of his forearm. The mire was not a small thing. A border garrison at the salt-fen, 3 weeks' ride east, run by a viceroy who ran men into prize pits for the wool traders. Men sent to the mire did not write home. Halden Vask understood, as the iron came away and the smell of his own skin rose, that the prince had not stripped him of his post. The prince had stripped him of his life. He looked once at Aldric. He did not glare. A captain of the guard did not glare. He only looked, and he made the look itself a vow. Then they put the iron collar on his neck for the road, and the gates of the Velenry Palace closed behind him for what every man and woman in the forecourt believed was the last time. 41 days remained until the coronation. The mire was worse than the rumor of it. They took the iron from his neck on the second day because there was nowhere to run. The salt-fen swallowed men in hours and gave back nothing and put him in a barracks of stripped soldiers and deserters. The viceroy was a thin, mannered man named Orvin, who had once been a court official. Orvin liked Halden Vask on sight. Orvin liked, he said, a man who had stood the inner stair. "You will fight in the pits," Orvin said pleasantly. 3 nights a week. The wool merchants pay handsomely. You will not refuse. You will not throw the match. You will not die quickly because that bores them. Do you understand? Halden understood. He set the cup back on the table without drinking. "I will need a sword," he said. Orvin smiled. "A wooden one, to start." The pit was a sunken ring of packed sand under a roof of black timber, lit by torches. The first man they put against him was a deserter from a southern levy, heavy-shouldered, desperate. Halden did not want to hurt him. He wanted to win without breaking him. He let the man come 3 times, and put him down a 4th with a controlled hook of the wooden sword behind the knee, and the wool merchants on the planks above leaned forward. 40 days remained. By the end of the 2nd week, the men in the barracks called him captain because he had been one, and because in the pit he carried himself like one still. He woke before the bell. He drilled in the sand of the yard alone the precise drills of the King's Guard, the high guard, the cross-step, the half-pivot drills he had taught 200 boys, now performed at 38 years old with the cold patience of a man who had nothing left except the discipline bred into his bones. A boy of about 14 began to watch him from the shadow of the well, a kitchen runner, son of a cook who had followed her husband to the mire and lost him to a fever. His name was Pell. He did not speak. He watched the drills, and after a week he began, secretly, in the kitchen yard at dusk, to copy them. Halden saw, and did not stop him. The discipline did not belong to a guard. It belonged to whoever would take it up. 30 days remained. The wool merchants came in their fat carriages, and bet, and lost, and bet again. Halden fought 11 matches in 3 weeks and won them all without breaking a man's bone. The viceroy began to charge double. A whisper went up the road, a pit fighter at the mire who moved like a guard, who had been a guard, who had once been the captain. The rumor opened the door. A wool merchant named Theron Brace, quiet, bookkeeper's eyes, a man who had ridden with the Velenry army 15 years before, came down to the pit on the 4th week. He watched Halden take a hired duelist apart in 2 minutes with a wooden sword. He came back the next night with a steel one and watched him do it again. On the 3rd night he came to Halden's barracks after the lamps had been put out, and sat on the edge of the straw cot like a man visiting a sick friend. "They told the court you killed Sentinel Lassick on the inner stair," Theron Brace said. "I did not," Halden said. "I know." Theron folded his hands. "I was at the inner gate that night. So was my nephew. He came off duty at the 3rd bell and saw 2 men carry a chest up the prince's private stair. Not your chest. Not your men. He did not say so, because he is a boy, and afraid, and the prince had already named you. He told me a week later when the wine got past his teeth. I have been looking for you since." Halden did not move for a long moment. "Speak it to the King Heir, then," he said. "The King Heir is the one who paid the men with the chest." Theron's voice was flat as paper. "And he will be crowned in 19 days. Once he is crowned, he is past any testimony. There is one window. The tournament of the lists is held the morning of the coronation. By old law, and by old law any man branded but not hanged may answer for himself there on the sand before the assembled court. If his blade is the better blade, the brand is lifted and the charge reopened. It has not been used in 60 years, but it has not been struck from the law." Halden looked at the brand on his forearm. The half-circle was pink and ugly. He thought of the prince's white glove. He thought of the cord falling onto the cobblestones. "How do I leave the mire?" he said. "By winning enough that the viceroy rides east as your owner," Theron said. "And by my carriage on the 8th night. There is a coronation tournament. I have entered a name, Halden of Vask Hollow, a free fighter of the river country. The name is yours. You will ride my carriage. You will sleep 3 nights at my house in the upper city. You will enter the lists. You will let your blade do the speaking." Halden Vask closed his hand on his forearm. The pink skin pulled. "And if my blade is not the better blade," he said, "then they will hang you in the square, and they will hang me beside you, and my nephew with us." Theron stood. "It is a coronation, Captain. We will not get another." 19 days remained. The viceroy did not need persuading. Orvin, who had built a small fortune on the back of the man the barracks called captain, was happy to ride east and rent him to the lords of the upper city. They left the mire on a cold morning. Pell, the cook's son, was at the gate with a small wooden sword he had carved himself, and he held it up, and Halden put his fist to his chest in the old salute of the guard. The boy returned it. The salute was crooked. The salute was real. The carriage rolled west 3 days through the salt country and 4 through the wheat, into the upper city at dawn, with the silver banners of the new King Heir already hung from every balcony. Halden slept in a back room of Theron's narrow house, did not show his face in the street, and drilled in the courtyard at dawn alone. The brand on his forearm he wrapped in linen. 5 days remained. He met 3 people in those 5 days. The first was Captain Roan Hennick, the man who had been promoted to captain of the guard the day Halden was stripped. Roan had been his lieutenant for 9 years. He came to Theron's house at midnight on the 3rd day in a hooded cloak, and sat across the kitchen table and did not raise his eyes for a long minute. "I did not believe it," Roan Hennick said at last. "I do not believe it, but I have a wife and a son, and the prince has the chapter." "I am not asking you to declare for me," Halden said. "I am asking you to ride the line and keep order in the lists, the way a captain of the guard rides the line. That is all." Roan looked at him for another long minute. Then Roan put his fist to his chest. He left without speaking. The second was the boy from the inner gate, Theron's nephew, a thin, pale guardsman of 19 who had not slept since the night he saw the chest carried up the prince's stair. Halden made him write his testimony in his own hand, twice, on 2 separate sheets. Witnessed before Theron and the steward, gave 1 copy to Theron for the lists, and kept the other folded in his own boot. The third was an old woman, the dead sentinel's mother. Theron had quietly sent for her on the morning the carriage came in. She sat in the front room with her widow's hood drawn up, and would not look at Halden, and would not be comforted, and would not say a word until Halden did a thing that surprised even Theron. He knelt down on the wooden floor in front of her chair, the way a guard knelt before the king on the day of his oath, and held his palms open on his knees, and said, "Mistress, your son died on the inner stair holding the door against the men who took the seal. He did not die at my hand. He died doing his duty. If I am wrong, drive me from your sight. If I am right, I will speak his name on the sand, and the court will know what your son was." The old woman wept for a long time. Then she said her son's name aloud, 3 times, like a prayer. Then she said, "Speak it, Captain." Coronation morning. The tournament of the lists was held on the great sand of the palace forecourt, the same forecourt where Halden Vask had once stood the king's vigil, the same cobblestones where Aldrich's white glove had let the captain's braid fall. The court was assembled on the gilded tiers. The regent sat at the front. The chapter of the guard stood in 2 lines, immaculate Roan Hennick at the head of one. The lion seal recast for the coronation sat on a velvet cushion at the foot of the dais. Aldrich of Velenry sat in a high carved chair with the coronet beside him on its own cushion, waiting for the noon bell to make him king. The herald cried the opening of the lists. 3 free fighters were named. The first was Halden of Vask Hollow. He walked out in plain steel cuirass and plain steel helm. He carried a plain straight sword. He did not look at the dais. He took his place on the marked stone and waited for the regent's nod. The regent gave it. He fought the first hired blade in 90 seconds. Disarm at the wrist, a sword point laid at the throat, lifted away. The crowd murmured. He fought the second, a heavier man with a war mace, in 4 minutes. He never struck the man's body, only the haft of the mace, twice, until it broke in the man's hand and the man stepped back and yielded. The murmur became a held silence. The chapter of the guard had begun to look. Roan Hennick's eyes were on him. By the old law of the lists, the third bout, the bout of answer, was the brander's right. Halden Vask laid down his sword. He drew the linen from his forearm. He held the brand up to the regent. "My lord regent," he said, and his voice carried clean across the sand, because a captain of the guard had been trained to make his voice carry clean across a forecourt. "I am Halden Vask. I was captain of the king's guard. I was branded 41 days ago for the murder of Sentinel Joran Lassick and the theft of the lion seal. I did neither. I bring the testimony of an inner-gate guardsman who watched the true chess carried up the prince's stair. I bring the word of the mother of Joran Lassick, who knows the truth of her son's death. I bring my sword. By the old law I answer for myself on this sand. I name the man who did the thing I was branded for. I name him as the bearer of the chest, the buyer of the silence, the architect of the lie. I name him as Aldrich of Velenry." There was no gasp. The court was too well bred to gasp. There was a sound that was perhaps worse, a long, even silence, in which every face in the upper tier turned, one by one, like a slow wind through wheat, toward the carved chair where the new King Heir sat. Aldrich did not look at Halden Vask. The prince's eyes went to the coronet on its cushion, then to the regent, then to the chapter of the guard, then to his own hands. They did not, in all of the long heartbeat, come up to meet the eyes of the man on the sand. The court saw it. Roan Hennick saw it. The regent saw it. Theron Brace stepped forward and laid the 2 folded papers on the regent's table. The old woman in her widow's hood stepped forward and named her son aloud, the second time that day. Roan Hennick stepped forward from the head of his line and put his fist to his chest, slowly, in the old salute of the guard, and held it there until every man behind him had done the same. The regent rose. The coronet was not lifted. The chapter of the guard did not move from the lines they had taken. The new King Heir was led from the carved chair without ever rising of his own will. The regent's voice, when it came, was steady and old. "The brand is lifted," the regent said. "The charge is reopened. The coronation is stayed." A herald walked the length of the sand to Halden Vask. The herald carried a braided cord. He laid it across the captain's open palms without speaking. Halden Vask did not put the braid on his shoulder. Not yet. There was a thing he had to do first. He walked across the sand to where the dead sentinel's mother stood in the line of the guard, and he put the cord in her hands, and he closed her fingers around it, and he said, very quietly, "For Joran." Then he turned to the chapter, and to Roan Hennick at the head of it, and he took his place in the line as a man, simply, who had come home. The bell that would have rung for the coronation rang instead for the opening of a hearing. The court did not move from their places. The sun stood very high. Halden Vask stood very still in the line. His back was straight. His eyes were level. He had stood through worse mornings. He had not bent then either.